Okay, on your lesson sheet, it has the verse for the whole lesson series of lessons on Esther. Our key verse is, "And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this." And that phrase, "for such a time as this," is what we often associate with Esther. That is Esther 4, in Esther 4:14. Our key verse for this lesson is Mark 7:21 through 22. And this verse is actually one that I think we could study for a whole lesson on itself, because I think it's a very powerful verse. So Mark 7:21 through 22, "For it is from within, out of a person's heart, that evil thoughts come. Sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, and folly." Out of one's heart, that evil thoughts come.
I would think that it would come from your mind, not your heart.
Okay, the Bible a lot of times speaks of the heart because historically the Jewish people felt like the heart was the center of everything of your body. Yes, it's actually out of your mind. That's what it means. I mean, what you let your mind dwell on is what's going to come out. Okay, does that make sense to you?
Yes.
Okay. Boy, there's a lot in that particular verse, isn't there? And if you, as we go through the lesson today, you will see that many of those words, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, all of those things, lewdness, envy, all of those things are kind of going to be hinted at in the lesson that we do today. Okay, we're going to be studying Esther 1, and we're going to look specifically at what it says. Now, we're going to kind of set the stage here, and I did that last week, and so some of this is a review. The Assyrians conquered Israel, which was the northern country. There's Israel and Judah. They conquered Israel and deported the people out of Israel to Babylon, to Assyria, approximately 721 BC. Then the Babylonians conquered the Assyrians, who exiled some more Jews, and that happened about 605 BC. Then the Persians got control. People who read the Bible and say, "Oh, those people in the Bible murdered and did all of that," it was all around them. They were far tamer than most of the people that they lived in the area of. I mean, there was a lot of this battle, fighting, whatever going on. And has it changed today? No. Okay. So anyway, the Persians gained control about 538 BC. And remember when we looked at our map last week, huge area that the Persians controlled, everywhere from in the east around India and to the west over in Egypt and up Turkey, north of the Mediterranean Sea, and all of the areas in between. It was a huge, gigantic area, very, very powerful. We also mentioned last week that Buddha and Confucius lived at the same time as Esther. Now, I keep talking about the post-exilic time and the pre-exilic. The pre-exilic is when the Promised Land was one country. They split into two countries, and then of Israel and Judah. Then when the Assyrians took them, it was exiled. They exiled the people. They forcefully took those people out of Israel and planted them somewhere else. We talked about that and the reasonings behind that. So we're in a post-exilic period. This period after the exile, when the exile started, lasted for about 500 years. Sometimes when we read the Bible, we don't understand the vast number of years that actually happened. And I also mentioned at that time, first we had the Persians, then the Greeks, then the Hasmoneans, and then the Romans. And those were considered the post-exile times. The Jews, when they were given the chance by the Persians to go back to Jerusalem, remember, a lot of them chose not to for a variety of reasons: age, economics, fear, the uncertainty of it, those kinds of things. Now, there are actually six books in the Bible that are written during the post-exilic time. And those are Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, and then Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. So those six books specifically address this post-exilic time. Exile, post-exile, post-exilic. Okay. Now, remember, and I have it written down there, I think, for you to look up, don't I? Ezra? Do I not have Ezra in there? Oh, there it is. Okay. Ezra 6:13. We're going to take a look at Ezra 6:13. Now, if you have your Bibles open to Esther, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, just jump towards the beginning of the Bible, just a couple of books, and you'll get there. Ezra 6, I think I have 13. Ezra 6:13. This is going to set us up. Now, King Darius is Xerxes' father. Xerxes is the king during the time of Esther. Okay, so Darius is who's talking about here. Ezra 6:13. Then, because of the decree King Darius had sent, Tatanani, governor of Trans-Euphrates, and Shethar-Bozaniah, and their associates carried out with diligence. So the elders of the Jews continued to build and prosper under the preaching of Haggai the prophet and Zechariah, a descendant of Iddo. They finished building the temple according to the command of the God of Israel and the decrees of Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes, kings of Persia. The temple was completed on the 3rd day of the month Adar, on the 6th year of the reign of King Darius. Then the people of Israel, the priests, the Levites, and the rest of the exiles celebrated the dedication of the house of God with joy. For the dedication of this house of God, they offered 100 bulls, 200 rams, 400 male lambs, and as a sin offering for all Israel, 12 male goats, one for each of the tribes of Israel. And they installed the priests in their divisions and the Levites in their groups for the service of God at Jerusalem, according to what is written in the book of Moses. So this is the first group of exiles. The Passover. In the 14th day of the first month, the exiles celebrated the Passover. The priests and Levites had purified themselves and were all ceremonially clean. The Levites slaughtered the Passover lamb for all the exiles and for their relatives, the priests, and for themselves. So the Israelites who had returned from the exiles ate, and together with all who had separated themselves from the unclean practices of their Gentile neighbors in order to seek the Lord, the God of Israel. For 7 days they celebrated with joy the festival of unleavened bread, because the Lord had filled them with joy by changing the attitude of the king of Assyria, so that he assigned them in the work on the house of the Lord and the God of Israel. Now, stop right there. These people had not celebrated Passover. They had not sacrificed because they didn't have a temple until at that point. Now, plunk in about 60 years here. Right here, between that verse and 7:1, there's about a 60-year period of time. 54 years after Zerubbabel led the first group back to Jerusalem, and then 25 years after that, Ezra leads the second group to Jerusalem. So Esther is right here. And there's a lot of time goes on right in between there. You know, they didn't write it like a modern day textbook. God chose not to write the Bible like a modern day textbook. And we have to really dig and study to figure out the timelines, and the archaeologists have figured out a lot of the timelines. So, Now, one of the things we need to remember as we're setting all this up, that the Jews are in Persia. Mordecai and Esther are among the Jews that chose to not go back to Jerusalem, and they are a part of a minority, a Jewish minority community. And remember last time we also talked about minorities and how sometimes minorities feel threatened. They are sometimes persecuted. They are sometimes mistreated. Okay, now Esther and Mordecai seem to be doing okay as we get started in our whole study, but you need to always remember that, because minorities are always at a disadvantage. Okay, now I am ready for Esther 1. Now, I think we've set up this really well. I think we're ready to go. So we're going to read Esther 1, 1 through 3. Now, some of you will have, especially those of you who have King James, will have Ahasuerus instead of Xerxes. It's the same person. Xerxes is the Greek name. Ahasuerus is the Hebrew name for the very same person, okay? This is what happened during the time of Xerxes. And Xerxes, who ruled over 127 provinces stretching from India to Kush. At that time, King Xerxes reigned from his royal throne in the citadel of Susa. And in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his nobles and officials, the military leaders of Persia and Media, the princes and the nobles of the provinces were present. Okay, what does those verses tell us? What's the information it gives us? It gives us lots of information, just facts. Give me a fact.
He was more or less having a big party.
He was having a big party. He was holding a banquet. This is banquet number 1. Remember I told you there were 10 banquets in Esther. This is banquet number 1. Okay.
I mean, can you imagine? Oh, I guess we're on. I'm looking at 4.
Okay, we'll get to 4 in just a minute.
Having a party for so long.
Okay. What else did you learn there?
They were not for so many people. Only the royals.
Okay, he held a banquet for the nobles and the officials and the military leaders.
Farther down,
Well, that's farther down. There are 2 different banquets here.
oh, okay.
There are 2 banquets in chapter 1.
Very proud of you.
Yeah, he was very proud of his riches. Yes. Okay, you guys are really quiet today, okay? Okay, how many provinces did he rule over? 127. Now remember, these provinces were people groups that they had conquered over a period of time. That's a lot to govern. You think 50 states is a lot. Well, there was 127 provinces with people with different customs, different languages, different religions. Okay. Where did it take place? In the citadel of Susa. And we mentioned that sometimes those are said, there's other words for Susa, but Susa and so forth. Now, remember the citadel of Susa, that is hard to say. Susa is the winter palace. That's where the Persian kings wintered. That's the winter palace. Okay, and how long had he been ruling? 3 years. Okay, now he held this big banquet and it had been for 3 years. His father Darius had been a very powerful ruler and had actually put a lot of the kingdom together and set up the government of it and so forth. But the one failure of his father was when he went in to defeat the Greeks and he wanted to take over Greece and he failed. He was unable to do so. So that was an embarrassment to Xerxes. And so he wanted to avenge his father's failure. And, he's a proud guy. He wants to set himself up as being as good or better than his father was, or as good as his father was. He wants to, show that I'm a pretty good leader too. So he wanted to have set up a military campaign. Well, how did they do that at this time? Well, at this time, they would have a big, huge feast and a lot of drinking, and they would bring the military leaders together and they would start planning the conquest. That's how they went about doing it, because they believed that intoxication led them closer in touch with the spiritual world. So if they would get together and you have everybody gets together, has food. So you get together, you have a bunch of food, and you get to drinking, and you start talking about this military conquest, and we're going to come up with a really great plan, and we're going to defeat those Greeks that my dad couldn't defeat. A lot of pride going on here, a lot of that type of thing. Okay, now I'm going to read verses 4 through 9. For a full 180 days, he displayed the vast wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and glory of his majesty. When these days were over, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days. This is the second banquet. In the enclosed garden of the king's palace for all the people, from the least to the greatest, who were in the citadel of Susa. The garden had hangings of white and blue linen, fastened with cords of white linen and purple material to silver rings on marble pillars. There were couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry. Doesn't have an R in it in the pronunciation, surprised me. Porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and other costly stones. Wine was served in goblets of gold, each one different from the other, and the royal wine was abundant, in keeping with the king's liberality. By the king's command, each guest was allowed to drink with no restrictions, for the king instructed all the wine stewards to serve each man that he wished. Okay, now the banquet happened before. Now we have 180 days, which would be about 6 months. He had everybody come in for a vacation on his expense. Okay. Then he decides, oh, that's not good enough. I'm going to have a banquet, and this banquet is going to last for 7 days. And this time I am going to include everyone who's in Susa. So it'd have been all those other people plus all the common folk. Okay. What else did it tell us about this banquet?
It's a drunken party.
Yeah, it was because there was no restrictions on how much they could drink. Oh, I can imagine what that was like, and all the vomiting and whatever else. Not pleasant. Okay, he was a rich guy. He was a braggart. He wanted to show off. He wanted to make everybody, really think he was wonderful. Okay, now.
Can you just imagine how it must have looked? It has this marble and mother of pearl and on and what all stones and gold goblets, and the way they describe the white and blue linen, cords of white and purple material, silver rings. I mean, it had to be gorgeous.
Had to be absolutely gorgeous. Very expensive. Did you notice it said that the wine goblets were all different, one from the other? So they would have been crafted by artisans, every single one of them. Yeah. You hope what? You hope they have porta potties. I don't think they probably did. Oh, man. A lot of people for a lot of days. Exactly. But then, of course, they had a lot of servants also. that kind of help clean up their messes and things. One of the things that is true of all of the Persian kings is that they liked to flaunt their wealth. You can see that in this. And as a matter of fact, the kings, they liked to wear precious gemstones. And not only did they just wear them, they would have them interwoven in their beards. Like to show how wealthy they are with all these jewels. And they would go into battle with their jewelry on to show their wealth. I know, I shook my head at that one too. I thought this is ridiculous. But that's what they did. That was what was important to them. Now, on verse 9, it says, Queen Vashti also gave a banquet for the women in the royal palace of King Xerxes. We can gather a couple of things from this. The women were not invited to the other banquet. So Queen Vashti threw a banquet for the women. They were totally separate. It's probably a good thing that they were all that drunk. Yeah. So they weren't a part of that. And I would imagine the women's banquet was a little more civil than the guys' banquet, just knowing how different men and women are. But then, sorry, dear. Yeah, but they might have been women probably were a little more persnickety and snippish about things, but then the guys who just threw a punch, So anyway, any other comments or anything you see in that particular section? Okay, let's look at Esther verses 10 and 11 and 12. 10. On the 7th day, when King Xerxes was in high spirits from wine, it took him 7 days to get there. Whoa. Okay. When King Xerxes was in high spirits from wine, he commanded the 7 eunuchs who served him, Memukan, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagatha, Zethar, and Carcass, to bring before him Queen Vashti wearing her royal crown, the jewels, in order to display her beauty to the people and nobles, for she was lovely to look at. But when the attendants delivered the king's command, Queen Vashti refused to come. Then the king became furious and burned with anger. Okay. So Xerxes in high spirits. And in his high spirits, he hadn't shown off there's one thing he hadn't shown off yet in his kingdom, and that's his wife. So he decides he's going to show off his wife. How would that make you feel? Huh?
Drunk and roll and have her go in there with all them drunk guys.
I know. I mean, she knew what it was. She was not a person. She was a possession. And that was true of a lot of the royal queens and concubines and other females in the royal households.
Well, in Allie's class on Sunday mornings, I've learned that women were just a nothing to these men. They didn't matter. They might as well be a chicken or something.
Women were considered second-class citizens. The men were the most important ones, and the women were good to have around. But they were not in control of anything. They were to be obedient. Okay. So, but Vashti. Now, some of the women were very powerful, and Vashti was very powerful because as queen, she would have been in charge of the household slaves. She would have been in charge of what a lot of the stuff that went on as far as the daily living in the palace and that kind of stuff. So she had control over a lot of stuff, over a lot of their daily living things. But she was a Persian princess, and she was extremely beautiful. And she, as Margie said, refused to display herself over those lustful, drunken eyes. And one of the things you see in the literature about the history is that the queens or the Eastern women, and you see it a lot in the Muslim communities, the women are not to be on display. The women are set in seclusion. They are not to be out on open display. So probably Vashti very seldom ever left the palace unless she was actually in the company of her husband, and they did take the wives to even in battles with them. Would take them out to the military field, but she would have been protected even in that. So she's in a palace. They had two palaces, the palace for King Xerxes and the palace for the queen, the concubines, and any women that were part of the royal household. They did not live together. So she's off over in this seclusion. She's having her nice little party. I can see them exchanging recipes, Anyway, but they would have been doing womanly things. And so she gets these 7 eunuchs that come to her and say, we're to escort you to the king. Now let's stop and talk just a minute. What's a eunuch?
Well, it's not really a, it was a man. I mean, it is a man.
Yeah, a castrated male. Do you think these guys had this happen on their own free will? No, they were slaves. And these were 7 slaves. And because they're mentioned here, they would have been very powerful. Their names are mentioned. You don't get your name in the Bible unless you had some power behind you or you were influential in one form or another. Now, what would these guys have been for? They would have been for sending messages for the king. They may have even read some literature to him. If he had to have something read, they would have provided his food. They would have set out his clothing. They would, just anything the king wanted. And I would imagine they may even had some special areas of expertise that would not have been uncommon. Anyway, so here comes these 7 eunuchs that belong to the king, to Queen Vashti, and surround her and say, hey, the king wants you to come over here to his party. And she goes, but I'm hosting my own party. And it would be inappropriate. It would be immoral for me to go to the men's party and not stay over here in the women's party. He was really asking her to do something that was countercultural for her.
But remember, he was drunk.
Yeah, I mean, he was drunk. Yeah, that was true. But it still was countercultural. Okay. So she says no, and what happens? The king becomes furious and burned with anger. Now, again, because he'd been drinking, there's a strong possibility that his drunkenness fueled that anger. But he wouldn't have had to have been drunk for him to get angry, because this king was powerful. Nobody told him no. Absolutely no one. So, oh boy, what's going to happen next? Verses 13 through 18. Since it was customary for the king to consult experts in matters of law and justice. Okay, now, we've said, I'm just going to stop there. We've said that nobody told him no, but he did have counselors. And this is a good thing. And because, nobody can know every law or whatever else. And, especially over this large a kingdom, I'm sure that, like we have to have lawyers interpret the law for us. I'm sure that he needed to have somebody remind him what was the law. He's mad. He wants to do something about it, but he knows he has to stay within the law. There were politics then. The king could not just do 100% as he pleased, but boy, about 99%. Okay, since it was customary for the king to consult experts in matters of law and justice, he spoke with the wise men who understood the times and were closest to the king. Karshena, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsina, and I always mispronounce this name, Memukan. The seven nobles of Persia and Media who had special access to the king were highest in the kingdom. According to law, what must be done to Queen Vashti, he asked. She has not obeyed the command of King Xerxes that the eunuchs have taken to her. Then Memukan replied in the presence of the king and the nobles, Queen Vashti has done wrong, not only against the king, but also against all the nobles and the peoples of all the provinces of King Xerxes. For the queen's conduct will become known to all the women, and so they will despise their husbands and say, King Xerxes commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, but she would not come. This very day, the Persian and Median women of the nobility who have heard about the queen's conduct will respond to all the king's nobles in the same way. There will be no end to disrespect and discord. Oh my. Okay, so in verse 13 and 14, it says that he consulted with his advisors. Now, these would have been men who were highly educated, had supposedly good judgment, and probably had some knowledge of sorcery or divination, because sorcery and divination of various sorts were very common in this part of the country and part of their religious beliefs. Now, when we see the things about the Medes and the Persians were like first cousins, and they really kind of worked together. A lot of times you will hear the area of Persia called Medo-Persia. So that's kind of what's there. There were 7 of these guys, his cabinet of 7. And he asks them for their advice according to the law. According to the law. Note that, okay? Then, of course, we have the name of all of those guys that are there for him. So how does the Memukan answer?
She did wrong. She did it in front of all these people.
Okay, so this wasn't this wasn't a private argument. This was a very public argument. So the king's pride was way out there. And not only the king's pride, but his advisor's pride and the pride of all the men that were around and could have heard this. Okay, now in his answer, I'm going to read this again. Then Memukan replied in the presence of the king and the nobles, Queen Vashti has done wrong, not only against the king, but also against the nobles and the peoples of all the province of King Xerxes. Did he mention the law? No. Xerxes says, according to the law. Did he mention the law? No.
That's why he went to them, right?
Yeah, he called on them to find out what the law said he could do to Vashti, because he was going to punish her. Okay? But Memukan didn't care about the law. All he cared about is that there's a possibility that the women could not be quite so compliant. Yeah.
Uprising here.
Yeah. He says in 17, for the queen's conduct will become known to all the women, so they will despise their husbands. And they'll say, hey, Queen Vashti didn't have to do what the king told her, so I don't have to do what you tell me. Kind of tells you something about the state of relationships that they had. They didn't have mutual respect for each other. That wasn't going on. What does God call us to have? Mutual respect. The woman's supposed to be submissive to her husband, but the husband is supposed to love the woman as himself. That is mutual respect. That is not what is happening here. And he goes on to say in verse 18 that the women will hear about the queen's conduct and will respond in the same way. So we have a major problem going on. I'm taking a quick look at my notes. This Memukan was probably very powerful, because he's the one. I mean, and he almost sounds like a bully to me. Some of these people that are very powerful and very strong leadership positions that always get their way. I can think of one or two in our Congress right now. It just seems like that whatever they say, everybody else goes along with them. They're tending toward not listening to other opinions, not caring about other opinions, but just plowing right ahead. And I just use that as an example. It happens all the time. It happens on committee meetings. I was on a jury once, and one guy was not, he was going to take over, and it was going to be his way. In a way that he really kind of put down anybody who disagreed with him.
Was he the foreman?
Well, of course.
Oh.
Yeah, but it happens all the time. It doesn't just happen in government. It happens around us all the time. Okay. A lot of times what these type of leaders do is they will take a basic truth and exaggerate it. That's what that's what the serpent did to Eve. He said, did God really say that you would die if you ate that beautiful piece of fruit over there? Well, he was making Eve think that, that she had been told a lie, because he made it sound like she was really dumb if she believed that. And so this is the way it works. It's worked that way since Adam and Eve. Why should we expect it to change now? Did you have something to say, Ray? Okay, you looked at me like maybe you might. I am a submissive wife after all. Just making eye contact. That's one of the things we discuss once in a while. Okay. Esther 1:19 through, I'm as bad at it as he is, so that's not saying anything. Okay, Esther 1:19 and 20. Therefore, if it pleases the king, let him issue a royal decree, and let it be written in the laws of Persia and Media, which cannot be repealed, that Vashti is never again to enter the presence of King Xerses. Also, let the king give her royal position to someone else who is better than she. Then when the king's edict is proclaimed throughout all this, his vast realm, all the women will respect their husbands from the least to the greatest.
The thing that stands out to me here is that the answer is always make another law. And Jesus says the law doesn't work.
Very good point. Yeah, the answer always seems to be make another law. And as in the Bible, it tells us that, the law isn't what's important. It's what's in your heart that is important. Now, the law is important, but it's what governs us is really what's in our hearts. If evil is in our hearts, we're going to do evil. If love is in our hearts, we're going to exude love.
I don't think there was a lot of love going on here.
I think there was very little love going on. Although in some of the commentary types things that I read, they really believed that Vashti and Xerxes at some point early in their relationship did have a fairly affectionate relationship going on, that this whole drunken orgy of showing off and everything else just shattered it. And, sometimes that's all it takes, to one really bad event to shatter a relationship. Okay, What we learned from this in 19 is that he says this really strong thing: she will never again enter the presence of the king. There is no option for repentance. That is not a Christian philosophy. Christians are supposed to ask for repentance. They're supposed to be able to forgive and give forgiveness to someone who requests repentance, or who is repentant. So that again is not what God would want us to do. And it's going to be proclaimed throughout the whole land. I mean, yeah, it's here in Susha, everybody knows about it, but now it's going to be everywhere. There's a really huge thing made out of it. It was already a big thing. Now it's even bigger because it's being spread throughout the whole land. I want to look at Psalm. I don't have it there. Okay, look up Psalm 37. Verse 12. This doesn't fit exactly, but I do think it fits somewhat well with the whole study that we're doing. Psalm 37, 12, and 13. It says, the wicked plot against the righteous and gnash their teeth at them. But the Lord laughs at the wicked, for he knows their day is coming. So people that do right, wicked people plot against them. Is God going to let that stand? No. God goes, you will be punished. Wrong will be punished. So let's look at Esther 1:21 again. It says, the king and his nobles were pleased with this advice, so the king did as Memukan proposed. He sent dispatches to all parts of the kingdom, to each province in its own script, and to each people in their own language, proclaiming that every man should be ruler over his own household using his native tongue. So the king and his advisors, well, they thought, this is really good. We like this. And so it became law in the whole land. It was impulsive decision-making. And quite honestly, impulsive decision-making, you better have said a prayer beforehand, because quite honestly, often impulsive decisions don't pan out very well. We need to maybe be making thoughtful decisions. Emotions were running high. They were mad. Should you be making an important decision while you're mad? I don't know about you, but some of the mistakes I've made in decision making is when I was angry.
So the time frame was pretty short in this.
We would assume
Between what happened to the consequences.
Yeah, we would assume that the time frame was pretty short. Yes. There was no room for dissent or other people's ideas. I mean, once this Memukan and the king kind of grasped this idea, everybody, they just plowed it on through. If anybody had disagreed or seen or observed or thought about anything that this might make this a bad decision, they weren't allowed a voice. They were blinded by arrogance and self-importance. That's all evident there. These are all things that we have to watch out for in ourselves. We don't have it to this extent, any of us. I know you don't. You guys are just sweet people, but we will have little seeds of these things in our lives at different times in our lives, and we can't allow them to grow. It was a very unfair edict, and it should not have happened. Now, do you have anything that you would like to say or ask about in chapter 1? Or just an observation or a thought about what you've read in chapter 1?
In my study Bible, when they talked about the queen, they said that basically they just gave hypotheses of why she wouldn't show up. One was the behavior. The other was that she might have been still pregnant with the third son.
Ah, so your commentary says she just didn't like the whole thing that was going on, and she may have been pregnant with her third son.
The funny part is that's the son that takes over the kingdom.
Yeah, he's the next king. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And who was that?
Vashti.
Say these people's names. I never do that.
Yeah. Well, and
Tax tourists.
Oh, yeah.
okay, so the whole thing is here, I mean, not only was it just a humiliating thing, but she was pregnant. Yeah, no woman wants to be put on display when they're pregnant. You know, I mean, I don't know, maybe some do, but most do not really want their physical attributes on display while pregnant.
Oh, I think they do. Have you seen the outfits they wear?
Some of the outfits are, yes, maybe you're right,
Display that. Probably not in those days.
but
No.
probably not then.
Well, yeah.
No.
Okay, other thoughts or comments? Okay, what does God want us to know? I have some verses that I thought would be good to look at that go along with the same themes that we have been talking about. So let's turn to Psalm 59, verse 1. This is a Psalm of David, but you know, Saul was trying to kill him, and that's what's going on here. But you can see that the evil intent of men just repeat themselves over and over again. Satan has the same themes all the time, over and over and over again. You'd think we would figure out, hey, Satan, that's you doing that same old thing again. I understand. I'm not going to succumb to it, but we do. Okay, verse 1, deliver me from my enemies, O God. Be my fortress against those who are attacking me. Deliver me from evildoers and save me from those who are after my blood. See how they lie in wait for me. Fierce men conspire against me for no offense or sin of mine, Lord. I have done no wrong, yet they are ready to attack me. Arise to help me. Look on my plight. You, Lord God Almighty, you who are the God of Israel, rouse yourself to punish all the nations. Show no mercy to wicked traitors. They return at evening, snarling like dogs, and prowl about the city. See what they spew from their mouths. The words from their lips are sharp as swords, and they think, who can hear us? But you laugh at them, Lord. You scoff at all those nations. You are my strength. I watch for you, God. No, I watch for you. I read that wrong. You are my strength. I watch for you. You, God, are my fortress, my God on whom I can rely. God will go before me and will let me gloat over those who slander me. Now, this particular set of verses, it kind of tells us a little bit about how to pray. It starts off with a request. Verse 2, deliver me from the evildoers. And then it goes into praise. Verse 5, you, Lord God Almighty, you are the God of Israel, rouse yourself and punish the nations. Nope, that's the request. And then it goes on and states the whole situation there, what's going on. They return at evening, they snarl like dogs, all of that. And then it says that in verse 9, you are my strength, I watch for you. Verse 3, it just breaks my heart with this. It says, no offense or sin of mine. I have done no wrong. Does that ever happen that somebody who has done no offense or has done no wrong gets punished?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Or suffers? Well, Vashti did nothing wrong. And she suffers for that. Okay, let's look at Daniel 2:20. You know, life just isn't fair. Life just is not fair. I think that chapter is what it's telling us. Don't expect things to be fair. Don't get mad if things aren't fair. Life is not fair. People who don't deserve it will be suffering. Okay, Daniel 2:20. Praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. He deposes kings and raises up others. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. So God is in control. And if you seek wisdom, you will get wisdom from him and you will gain knowledge. It says he gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He doesn't just give wisdom, he gives wisdom to the wise. He doesn't just give knowledge, he gives knowledge to the discerning. In other words, he expects us to be active in that pursuit of knowledge and wisdom. It's not just going to sit here and just, we aren't going to absorb it like a suntan. We have to ingest it. We have to work with it. We have to think about it. We have to pursue it if we want knowledge and wisdom. Okay, applying God's message to our lives. Human choices have profound results. What were some examples of that from this passage in Esther that we did today? Human choice has profound results. An example.
The queen refusing to appear.
The queen refused to appear and she suffered for it.
Yep.
And not only did she suffer, but all the women in that whole huge Persian kingdom suffered. That wasn't fair to them. They didn't do anything. You know, some of the decisions we make have consequences beyond what we think they have. We need to be really thinking about how our decisions affect other people and not just us. I can make this decision because it's my decision. It only affects me. Yeah. Every decision you make affects somebody else. Okay. Through both the pleasant and difficult times, we must have faith that God is in control. And God is in control of this bad thing that happened to Vashti, because what happens as a result of that, Esther becomes queen and the Jewish people are not annihilated. That is how that all works out. Now, at the time, it didn't look like it's too good for the women, you know, and it wasn't, but it's going to work out in God's overall plan.
That's just the first chapter.
That's chapter 1.
Right. I mean, we got a lot more to go through.
There are 10 total chapters. Yeah. It gets a lot more interesting. I mean, I don't know. I mean, chapter 1's kind of interesting. Everything that happened there. You don't think about that kind of stuff in there. But if you stop and read it, I mean, I've read Esther several times and I just flew through it. Didn't think about it. But there's quite a
You
bit.
can't be wise doing that.
From the wisdom of my husband, I can't be wise doing that. Thank you, dear.
And you evidently study the history of that time period too, which makes a lot of difference
Yeah.
Mm.
And I apologize if I ever get any of the history wrong or any of that. I'm doing my best understanding of it at this particular time because it is confusing. I think it's very confusing, but the more I study it, the more I at least get parts of it in my mind. You'll see me looking over here and checking my notes on stuff because I'm trying to make sure that I get that correct. Okay. I'm trying to turn off my recording. Keep my nose down. Okay. Well, I hate Zoom that where people, all you see is their nostrils. You know, they sit there and they're sitting in their chair and all you see is their nostrils. I hate that. So the last video I did, I mean, you see, I've got it on books now. I didn't realize, but I had it tilted just a little bit so you could see me. Well, that makes it look in my nostrils. I hate that. They are clean. So, okay.